What is up, guys, and welcome back. We have another episode of The Last of Us Season 2, which is Episode 5, titled Feel Her Love. And this was another great episode. A lot of really cool things that are very reminiscent of gameplay segments from the video game, some very iconic moments recreated from the video game, and really is the first time that we start to see the extremely dark path that Ellie is about to endure for the rest of this season, as well as Season 3 whenever that comes out. So I do have a lot of thoughts. There are certain things that I'm still a little concerned about, some things that I wasn't completely on board with how they switched around and implemented in the show version, but overall, an episode I liked. And as all of the others, if you're joining me for the first time for this season, I'm going to talk about the episode-specific spoilers for the first segment of the video, and then eventually I'll get into video game spoilers, which will deal more with speculation of events of the future. So if you have not played the video game, you don't want to know anything that has not yet been revealed in the show, that's the segment that you're going to want to avoid until the end of the season or until you go experience the video game. So this whole episode kicks off with a cold open where you have one of the officers of the WLF is sitting in a room, and the woman that Isaac had met in the last episode, I presume like his second in command, comes in to meet her, and they start to have a discussion about this hospital that they are currently trying to use as a base and probably scavenge for a lot of supplies and things like that. And they find out through this officer who is being interrogated that they have completely barricaded and locked down the basement of the hospital because they have discovered that the infection, the cordyceps virus, has continued to evolve, and now it has evolved into this airborne version, which is called spores. Now, the interesting thing about spores is that spores was always a thing in both of the video games. You get introduced to spores within like the first hour of gameplay in The Last of Us 1. But that was something that they decided to leave out of the first season of the show and changed it for the tendrils, which have not made their way into the game yet. The little pieces of like the little roots of the fungus, where if you mess with that, it kind of alerts all the rest of the infected. And in season 1, that was a big point of controversy because all the people in the video games are like, how the hell are you going to tell the story without spores? Like, spores are integral to this universe. And I was certainly worried when I first watched season 1. I was like, oh, okay, you know what? Calm down, guys. Like, I'm right there with you. I understand spores are a big thing, but they have found a way to navigate around that. And the thing that they have replaced it with is actually really cool. But now we've reached a point in the second season of the show where they're finally actually introducing spores, which is essentially just airborne cordyceps pieces that if you breathe them in, you're instantly infected. You don't have to get bits. You don't have to actually be, penetrated by teeth or scratches or anything like that. Just breathing it in means you are done for. And so as far as the lore of this show, that's arguably maybe the most devastating version of the cordyceps evolution yet, because that's pretty fucking hard to avoid. If it's in the air and all you have to do is breathe to lose your life, it's pretty extreme. So I love the way that they introduced it. I love the very grim foreshadowing tone that they have with this about it's in the air. And the extra detail, too, is that this officer that is being interrogated says that her and her son were the one leading the excavation of the bottom floors of the basement. And her son is the one that discovered it, and he was coughing, and he told her to lock everything down and lock them in. And she did. And while they don't necessarily focus on that, it is something that when you keep in mind what Joel did, also in a hospital setting, it's very much a parallel, an opposite situation of Joel's decision, where you have a guy that sacrifices himself, tells his mother to leave him there for the greater good, and she does. Very much a parallel to Joel's decision. So a subtle little detail there that I thought was really cool. But finally getting into the spores is exciting. I think the way that the episode has a cold open to kind of tease that introduction was really well done. Then we catch up with Ellie and Dina, who are still at the theater, and they're trying to plan their attack on the hospital, which is where Nora is at. And I like the conversation that they have where she's wondering how Dina has all this information, and she's like, these fuckers say everything on these walkie-talkies. And then you get a little bit of the explanation, the context of how the Seraphites are probably like the Amish. They probably have renounced all modern technology, and they're very cultish, and they just kind of live off of the land. And so they don't have any worries about saying things out loud over the airwaves because they know that the Seraphites are not going to be using any kind of technology to pick up any of this information anyway. So that was a pretty cool little bit of exposition there. And they basically have this plan where Dina is looking at the map, and she's mapped out all the different patrols from there to the hospital, and she tells Ellie there's this one little gap in the middle here that they always avoid, and it's around this big warehouse. And they quickly deduce, well, they must avoid it because there's probably some fucked up infected in that warehouse. So that's going to be the easiest path for us to get around them, but at what risk? And so that, again, a little bit of foreshadowing there that some shit's probably going to go down inside of that warehouse. And Ellie and Dina go on their way, start to walk through Seattle, heading towards the hospital and this little bit of a warehouse gap that they're going to try to exploit. And they come across this big, nice piece of graffiti where it displays the woman who is the leader, the originator of the Seraphites, the Scars, and it says the words "Feel her love" beneath it, which is kind of like their mantra. And just below that, you have a taunting message from the WLF, and then a bunch of rotting bodies that have been there for a very long time with flies and everything around them, where the WLF has murdered a bunch of Seraphites and left them there. And yet again, you get kind of like this shocking response from both Ellie and from Dina, where everything going on with the wolves and the Seraphites is like the most gross bit of brutality that they've ever seen, despite being such a fucked up world. And when Dina yet again starts to have this very nauseated response to it, it starts to set off like this little bit of reaction with Ellie, where she's starting to wonder if it's best for Dina to even carry on in this mission. And so she tells her, hey, if you want to go back, we'll go back now. I can do this alone. And it prompts Dina to have this conversation with Ellie, where she finally goes back to that conversation they had in the previous episode where they were asking, or maybe 2 episodes ago, where they were asking each other about the first person that they ever killed, and we only got the answer from Ellie. And Dina finally gives her answer, telling a story about how this raider killed her mom and her sister, and she came upon it all and murdered the raider in revenge right then and there, and gives the extra context of, I don't know what it would have been like if I had sat there and actually watched him killing them, and if he got away, I would chase him to the ends of the earth forever. And so that's her way of kind of reassuring Ellie, saying, I understand the path that you're on, and I'm here with you. Like, I am right there with you. I want to kill these people just as much as you are, and I know what you're going through, and I'm not turning around and leaving you to do this alone. And I was very mixed on this exchange. I got to be honest. I think that the dialogue is great. I think the acting is great by Isabella Merced, and I think that the core of what they're going for with this dialogue, I think, is really good. But I can't help but feel like the show so far is really spoon-feeding that revenge theme a little bit too much. It's almost like they don't trust the audience to pick up on these certain things and to pick up on what the ultimate message of this season, and even more so with the third season, being revenge and violence begets violence and the path of violence and all that stuff. And again, I don't think that I would have an issue with it at all if I didn't have the video game to compare it to. But I felt like the video game trusted you a lot more. It trusted you to connect those dots a lot more. You got to kind of expand on a lot of those emotions a lot more, have time to breathe and live in them a lot more. And the show just feels like at this point they keep kind of telling you what we're going for rather than showing you more. So again, not a huge issue, but that was a moment where I was like, okay, I like this dialogue, but again, it just feels like we're a bit too on the nose with what we're trying to communicate here. And I don't know if that's the writers having a bit of a response to the controversy of the game, or if they just don't trust TV audiences as much as they do video game audiences. I really don't know, but it's something that isn't completely working for me yet, where I feel like it was a much more meaningful experience in the video game so far, and the show is a little bit more on the nose with it. But, you know, that's the only thing in this episode that I was a little unsure about how I felt. So you have that whole exchange, and Ellie's like, okay, they pretty much are saying, all right, we're in this together. We're going to go through this, you know, despite her being pregnant, we're in this together. We're going to live together. We're going to die together. Then they eventually get to this warehouse that they assume has something inside of it that is keeping the WLF away from them. And when they get inside, right before they start to really descend into it, this really great dialogue exchange where Dina essentially tells Ellie, like, we can't make any noise. As soon as we start firing gunshots, if we get out of here, we're going to have the wolves up our ass. And so we're just going to create more problems. So There's obviously not a horde in this room. It's not big enough to be. So what are we looking at worst case scenario? Like a couple runners, 2 or 3 clickers. Like we've dealt with that before without guns. So we need to stick to knives. And if, God forbid, it does get overwhelming, we need to run rather than pull out our guns. And I liked Ellie's response where she's like, oh, you think I'm just going to start firing? And she's like, yeah, you always do. You're crazy. And that's what I love about you. So that was a really fun little bit of dialogue there where just the difference in personality, again, where Dina's much more the methodical thinker and Ellie's much more the emotional person, like kind of the loose cannon when it comes to these things. I like that side of their dynamic kind of balancing each other out. And also a little bit of foreshadowing. It's like we would not have this big, long explanation if there was not something fucked up in this room that's going to really require them to fire bullets at some point. So they go into the warehouse and everything seems quiet. Everything seems cool. And then eventually they hear something. I like when they peek out and then you got the one little stalker that's sitting there and he ducks back in. And Dina's like, what the fuck was that? And she's like, oh, it's one of those smart ones that I was telling all you about in Jackson that everybody was silencing me, telling me not to get any panic going. And I loved the instant tension that we get where they look again and all of a sudden there's like 3 of them. And then they go back down and then they look at where they just came in at and there's like 5 of them there. And it's like, holy shit. The one stalker in the first episode was already a pretty huge established threat because of how smart they are and how they'll flank you and they'll outsmart you. And now you have 5 of them. So very quickly and quietly, I loved how they built up the threat level inside of this warehouse without needing a big bloater, without needing a horde. It's just, oh, there's a bunch of these smart ones and now you're fucked. And the instant panic of Ellie as she looks over and sees this little locked cage area and she knows the only option. She's like, okay, look, I can get bit and I can get bit a lot. So you get your ass in that cage and we're just going to try to get out of this. And suddenly Dina runs, the door's locked and Ellie's out and bullets are flying and she's taking out a few stalkers here and there. And then very quickly it gets overwhelming where 2 or 3 of them tackle Ellie. Didn't really show her getting bit, but I assume she was getting bit or scratched up at that point. So she's yelling and screaming, can't get a hold of anything. Dina's inside of this caged area and 2 or 3 stalkers are starting to push in the chain link. And then suddenly there's a silhouette and a bunch of gunshots. And all of a sudden all the stalkers are just getting taken out one by one. Just pop, 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 pop. And I knew in that moment who it was. But I had a sneaking suspicion that this might be one of those moments where they switch things up to kind of keep us video game fans on our toes. So you see this hand come out after the threat has been neutralized, and Ellie goes to grab it. And what I liked about it, which again was one of the subtle things that they didn't like beat you over the head with as much as I feel like they're doing the revenge theme, is that in that moment, I feel like Ellie kind of felt like Joel was back for a second. Like you had somebody, you had this protector, you had this hand come out to save her. And, they didn't give any kind of visuals to cue you in on that. They trusted you as an audience to put that together for the 2 seconds there. But she grabs the hand and he lifts her up. And I thought this was going to be Tommy because we haven't really seen a whole lot of Tommy so far, at least in the Seattle side of things. And I've wanted to see more of him. Now, in the video game, it is Jesse who eventually catches up with them and, ran out to try and save them. And so whenever it shows the face, it was Jesse. So they did not pull the little switcheroo I thought they were going to. And what I liked about this is the difference in how Jesse acts in this moment versus in the video game. Because in the video game, he's still very playful. He's like, do you think I was going to let you do this all by yourself or something like that? And so he's very much like not upset at all to have been dragged all the way to Seattle to come and save their ass. And in the show, it is very different. And so immediately he's very cold to Ellie and he's like, let's fucking go. I don't even want to talk to you right now. And they're following him, trying to give him this explanation. He's just shutting this shit down. And I got you have a lot of questions going on here. It's like, does he know that Dina's pregnant? Is he protective and pissed off that his pregnant ex-girlfriend, girlfriend, whatever, is off in danger? Is he upset that clearly they're in a relationship and there's like this love triangle thing going on? There's a lot of different angles you could go to kind of color out how Jesse's frustration is manifesting towards both of them, but mostly Ellie. But I like the way that they kind of kept it on business, where they start to press him, and he's like, very clearly he was more pissed off at the fact that he had to save them than anything else. Like, he didn't just walk up on them and they're all good. He walked up on them and it's like 2 seconds later, you both would have been dead. And I love the dialogue where he starts to get on their ass and Ellie starts to say, like, we were doing just fine until you came, and he cuts her off before she can even say it. He goes, until when? And she's like, until we weren't. So I liked that. I liked a little bit of that. It's almost like a dad or an older brother kind of thing, where it's just like, don't give me that bullshit. You know you needed my help, and if I wouldn't have been there, you would have been fucked. So go ahead. Go ahead. Tell daddy how great he is for saving your ass. But now, because of their exchange inside of this warehouse with all the stalkers and all the bullets that were let out, now the wolves are fully on their ass. And so now they're running away from the warehouse. They're just ducking for cover, trying to find anything. And they end up going towards this park. And they're figuring, we're going to go into this park and we'll lose them inside of the trees and everything like that, and we'll try to escape that way. And when you start to see the entrance to the park, video game fans immediately are like, oh shit, I know where this is heading. But they go inside the park, they duck at the first chance that they can, and immediately the wolves are like, yeah, we're not going in there. So they radio off, we got 3 intruders, they're not Seraphites, and they walked into the park. And so for TV viewers, it's like, what is in that park that they're afraid to go in there? And they start to explore a little bit more, and then quickly they start to hear some whistles. They start to see some torches come through, and then they witness the Seraphites in their true form on the show for the first time, where, we've seen the aftermath of what they do. Now it's the first time we actually get to see them do it, where they have a captured wolf, and they have him hung up, and he gets disemboweled right in front of them for, his transgressions or for not being a Seraphite or whatever else. And so it shows how evil and brutal the Seraphites are themselves, which I was very kind of touchy about when they first started to introduce them, because it felt very much like they were leaning one side towards the other about the wolves being the true evil and the Seraphites being a little innocent. They have since shattered that, so I'm glad that that did not come to fruition. Now you just look at the wolves and the Seraphites equally as 2 very brutal, evil groups who are at war with each other, and it's like, I don't know which one's more fucked up, but I don't want to fuck with either of them. And I talked a little bit either the last episode or the episode before that about the introduction that we have to the scars in the video game, where you're crawling through this park, and then you go to lift up, and all of a sudden a sharp whistle happens, and then you just get hit with an arrow, and now you're in a full-blown fight with the Seraphites for the first time. And so they kind of switched it up on us here, where in the middle of them watching that, you hear a sharp whistle, and you hear an arrow, and then you look down, and Dina's been hit in the leg. And so now they're in full panic mode, where they're now under ambush by the Seraphites. And so you have a situation where Ellie tells Jesse to pick up Dina, haul ass back to the theater, and I'm going to lead everybody this way. So Jesse takes her and runs, and then Ellie's going. You got all the scars chasing her. You got arrows flying left and right, dodging everything around. And then she quickly escapes where this park is and seemingly is out of danger. But right in the distance, she sees the hospital. Now, what I will say about this spot that I'm a little mixed on is it feels a little rushed to get from the warehouse to the park to the hospital so quickly. Now, I understand logistically in a show like this, you can't account for a lot of time that's going to be spent in the video game with just gameplay segments and walking segments and climbing and everything like that. Like, naturally, it's going to feel longer and a little bit more fleshed out in a video game, because there's a lot more things to do to entertain you in those little lull moments, where in a show, they can't exactly stop between every single set piece to have you go walk a distance and climb things. And I get all of that. But at the same time, it does feel a little rushed. It feels a little much that all 3 of these major iconic locations are like within feet of each other. Nonetheless, easily forgivable, but something that I definitely noticed. So she sees the hospital, and you have this moment where she's like, I just told them I'd meet them at the theater, but my target is right there. And then she decides, fuck it, I'm going to go at it alone. And so you get a really great moment where she gets close to the hospital, and there's a lot of guards with dogs, and you get the dog that starts to lose his mind because he sees like little bits of brush in the grass. And so Ellie's on the ground crawling through the grass, which is something that you can do in the video game. So that was really cool as a visual to see how the grass moves, like basically the perspective of all of the wolves in the video game when you're crawling around and you're close enough for them to kind of get a little suspicious. So the dog starts to follow around, and then they see that there's this hole, and so Ellie has fit through this hole to get into the hospital, and they write it off as like a critter. And very quickly she catches up with Nora, who is the first person in Abby's group that she is able to catch up with. And from here, you get segments that are very similar to the game and are slightly altered. Now, this dialogue exchange is pretty much intact here, where she first meets Nora, tells her to put everything down and turn around. and Nora quickly realizes who she is. And while I do think that the dialogue hit a little harder in the game, I do like the fact that they kept everything intact, where she starts to go on and I think very genuinely starts to express that, the brutality of them killing Joel does affect her, Nora, where she's saying, I still hear his screams at night, and I'm sorry that you had to witness that. Nobody should have to witness something that horrific or that brutal. And then she very quickly turns it on a dime and uses it to taunt Ellie, where she was preying on her sympathies very slightly and then uses it to taunt her and says, you still hear his screams. Yeah, that little bitch got what he deserved. And then to look on Ellie's face of like, oh, motherfucker. Like, I was already going to kill you. Now I'm going to do it slow. Was great. So I love the fact that we kept that dialogue intact. She throws the shit at her and runs out. And they recreated this segment really well, where Ellie's chasing her with the gun out and Nora's screaming for everybody. There's an intruder to shoot her, and Ellie's just moving too quick. Nobody can really help her. And they eventually get to a point where Nora is at a dead end, and the only way that she can get away is to go through the elevator shaft, which is leading to the basement that they've already walled off for the threat that she does not even know about, because it was like a need-to-know basis. So she steps into the elevator, and the elevator busts, and she just falls down to basement 2. Now, I do prefer the way that the video game executed this spot, which is where you get to like a ledge, and even though Nora's at a dead end, she's more scared of what's down there than Ellie. So she's yelling for Ellie to stop, and Ellie just tackles her, and they both go down to B2 together. And immediately Nora's like, she's fucked because she's in the spores, but Ellie knows that she's fine. So granted, because we haven't been introduced to the spores yet, at least these characters haven't, I understand to an extent why they didn't do that, but I just think that the way that it was in the video game is a little more exciting, but still very cool here. She jumps through the elevator shaft. Ellie goes and follows the ladder, follows her down. And this is the first time that we actually get to see the show's version of the spores visualized, where, you have the cordyceps that are all over the floor, all over the walls, and you have people that are like basically buried in it that are attached to the wall. And they're kind of being used as almost like pumps, where they're sitting there and they're just breathing out the spores and creating this huge infected environment. And one of the people that are attached to the wall is the son of the lady that was in the cold open. So I do like the way that they visualized it in the show. In the video game, you just kind of see like these little sparkles, like these little, tiny details in the area that let you know there's something airborne. And I think they recreated that well in the show. And also that added detail of having the bodies that are attached to the wall be the device in which the spores are exhaled, because that was new. In the game, when you have bodies that are attached to the wall, they're either just a part of the environment, or sometimes it's a jump scare where you'll walk past them and then they break out and they come at you. So set design-wise, production design-wise, that was fantastic. And I don't know how much spores are going to be expanded upon in this season or the next season, or if it's going to be more of a threat relegated to this hospital for right now. But I really liked that segment. I think the way that they visualized it was very cool. And as she starts to make her way through, she starts to hear coughing. And so she finds the hallway where Nora is trying to crawl away and gather her strength. And I said, they better have the red lights in this segment. And then Ellie goes over and grabs the power block. And I was like, yes. And she hits it. And all of a sudden, all the red lights come on, which I think is just so badass of a look, because it makes like her eyes almost like jet black. So you have Nora that's on the ground, and she can't barely even breathe. And then you see just Ellie slowly walking towards her, almost like this demon coming out of the darkness. Loved that visual. And here you get dialogue that's very similar, where she looks at her and Nora's almost like trying to get one little bit of a silver lining out of the situation that she's about to die. And she's like, stupid bitch, you killed both of us. Like, we're both infected now. And I love Ellie's expression where she's like, did I? And then Nora realizing that she's not coughing, she's not reacting to the spores, and that realization of, you're her, you're the immune girl. I loved it in the game, and I loved it in the show. It's a very cool thing, because they know that Joel killed all of the Fireflies to try to get the immune girl out of there, and that was the whole reason why Abby's dad was there. So her having that little moment of connecting the dots, I thought was great in both iterations. Now, you have a situation here where she starts to give a lot of context that was not in the video game conversation, where she starts to explain to her, like, do you realize what Joel did? How many people he killed? He killed everyone, including the one doctor that could manufacture a cure. He just doomed everybody. and Ellie's reaction of, I don't care. And what's interesting about this is that you're having Ellie get information that was never given to her in the video game. She goes through the entire Last of Us 2 video game without ever finding out that Abby's dad was the doctor. Because it never really mattered. It was never a part of the story. It was not something that was like relevant information. She was on a vengeful blood path no matter what. So that little bit of information that she gets here is a little different, where she understands that Abby was doing it out of vengeance for somebody just the way that she is. So I'm curious on how that's going to be expanded upon, if at all. But you also have a revelation that is exclusive to the show, where, you know, Nora is telling her all this, like, he killed everybody at this hospital and got you out of there. And Ellie says, I know. And while I think you could assume that she found out because of the way that she was acting towards Joel in the beginning of the season, this is the first time that they have confirmed in the show that she knows the truth about what happened at the end of the first season. We have yet to see it, but this is the first time that they've confirmed that Ellie knows that she was going to be the cure, that they very possibly could have manufactured a cure from her, and Joel just murdered everybody in cold blood because he wanted to save her. Not the version of the story that he gave, where her immunity was not special at all, and there's tons of people out there with it, and they can't find a cure, and we wasted our time, and your immunity means nothing. So that's interesting. Now, you get the point here where Ellie has made it very clear. She does not care. I don't care what Joel did. I'm here for Abby. And so she grabs this pipe and asks where Abby is. And when Nora lets her know that she's not going to give up her friend, and she says no, she starts swinging this pipe. Now, in the video game, you only see Ellie's reaction, but it's very clear you're hitting her in the head. And you have to press the button to keep swinging. And so she's just beating her to death with this pipe. And in the show, she's more slowly torturing her, where she's hitting at her legs and her knees and everything else. So she swings at her, asks where Abby is, says no, swings at her again, then starts screaming it. I thought Bella Ramsey's performance was awesome in this scene. This is the first time you really get to see the darkness of Ellie. And I thought that they did a great job at conveying that with the look, the lighting and everything, but also the performance. Where is she? And, you know, it quickly cuts to black when she screams and she hits her for the third time. And so we don't really know if she got anything out of her or if she just beat her to death. So it cuts to black. And then you get this segment where she wakes up in bed and she's back in Jackson. And then Pedro Pascal, Joel, walks to the door and says, hey, kiddo. And the episode ends, which for me confirms that the next episode is basically all going to be flashbacks. That's where we're going to find out all of the stuff that fills in the gaps between season 1 and season 2. So overall, this episode I thought was very exciting. I thought that all the multiple segments here with the warehouse and the multiple stalkers and the Seraphites in the park, as well as the chase and the beating of Nora, all that I think was done really well. You know, a couple of things in here that I was still a little concerned about with how on the nose they're being with the theme of the season. Still a little bit worried, or well, not worried, just a little disappointed we haven't gotten more Tommy so far this season. But overall, I really liked the episode, and I loved the way that they introduced spores into the show. I still am very concerned about the fact that we only have 2 episodes left, and seemingly confirmed that the next episode is going to be all flashbacks. So really only one more episode as far as the current timeline to advance the story that we're on before we're going to be on like a 2-year break, because they've already announced they're not going to be filming season 3 until 2026, which means we're probably not going to see it till 2027. And goddamn, that's a bitch. Like, I understand the production delay and everything because of the strikes and everything between season 1 and season 2, but I really hope they push that production schedule a little bit. You know, I know that HBO and Max, they love to take their time. It's like a 2-year turnaround on all their big premiere shows, but man, I'm just, that gets so old for me as a TV fan, where it's like we used to have like 22, 24 episode seasons every single year, and now we get like 7 episode seasons every 2 years. The production is massively improved, so I get that, but man, for the type of story that they're telling, that they're literally going to cut in half and leave us on a cliffhanger and leave a lot of the most challenging stuff until the 3rd season, and to ask TV audiences to wait and hold their breath for 2 years, I'm worried. I'm worried that they're going to negatively impact the viewership of this show, even more so than just the creative decision to kill off Joel. So I'm still, enjoying the season a lot so far, but I'm still very worried at the fact that it was only a 7-episode season and not even having the information of like how long season 3 is and everything. There's certain segments of the story I think they're doing great. There's certain segments that feel like it's a little bit rushed just because I've experienced the more expanded version of it. I'm having those difficulties that book fans have when their books get turned into TV shows or movies, and all they can focus on is all the stuff that's missing rather than how well they adapt the things that are actually there. It's difficult. It's difficult as a fan sometimes to navigate those thoughts, where very clearly I love the video game, and so that version of the story is beloved, and that's what my template is, and the differences and the things that are missing here, even if it makes sense because of my knowledge of how a TV show can't show everything in the game, it's still frustrating. So really like the episode, massive concerns about how they're going to be able to wrap this up in a satisfying way with 2 episodes left. But moving on now to the video game spoiler side of things. So this is something that's going to be more presuming, doing some talking about the future of the events in the video game. So you've been warned. If you've only watched the show, it's probably not a segment you want to watch. I am very curious of how and when they're going to incorporate Tommy. Like, are we just going to have Tommy meet them at the theater, which I assume is going to be our season closer cliffhanger, where they do whatever they do to, I don't know if they're going to the aquarium or whatever is next as far as Ellie's revenge path, and then they end up at the theater right before Abby comes in. I do assume it's going to go down the exact same way. I think that they're going to have their dialogue, everything's going to seem fine, they're going to go back out, try to find Abby, and then you're going to hear a gunshot, and then suddenly she's got Tommy on the ground, and Jesse's going to be killed, and she's going to give that line of, "We let you live and you wasted it," and it's going to go cut to black. I really think that's the only option here that makes sense as far as where to split this story. But in the video game, you could just continue playing, and now they're going to ask us to wait 2 years and then ask TV audiences with only 2 appearances of Abby, one where she kills Joel, one where she kills Jesse, to now spend a lot of time with her as the focal point in the 3rd season. I'm worried it's not going to work. I think it's going to work fine for video game fans because we know and we can be patient and we know it's coming, but I don't think it's going to work for a lot of TV fans. I think people are going to be very, very frustrated at the cliffhanger. They're going to be frustrated at the wait, and they're going to be frustrated, 2 years from now when they start to see trailers and realize that season 3 is a lot of Abby. So I'm worried about that. I really am. Now, season 3 is greenlit, so it's not like it's going to get canceled or anything like that if people drop off by the finale, but I worry about the future of the show past that. And my hope is that Neil Druckmann will put a 3rd game into production at some point, and we will close out the story of Ellie in a video game and in the show. I don't know what the timeline of that's going to look like, but if this ends up being one of those situations where the viewership just drops off a cliff in season 3, then we're only going to get that season, I fear. So I'm a little afraid of that. I'm also very curious. I've seen some people point out the fact that this woman in the Wolves, the second in command to Jeffrey Wright, looks remarkably close to the woman who is in the graffiti. The woman, the martyr, the one that started the Seraphites. And so I've seen some speculation that she's the leader of the Seraphites, and she's just kind of like a mole, if you will, in the Wolves or something like that. There's something about that that's interesting, and maybe they're going to play that out in a way where in season 3 we get some of those reveals, but it also feels a little convoluted. It feels like she's at the head of a lot of these decisions that are killing the Seraphites, and so I just don't know logistically if that works. Now, if they had just introduced that scene where Jeffrey Wright and her shake hands or whatever they did, and then he goes and kills all of his people, and he joins the Wolves, if we had caught back up and he's the leader and she's nowhere to be found, I'd be more inclined to believe that. But since we saw the scene at the beginning of this episode where she's very clearly still in command, I don't know if that would work. There's something interesting there, and I get it, but I don't know if that'll work. I don't know if we're going to learn any more about this woman. That'd be a cool cold open to learn a little bit more about her, but I don't know. So yeah, a lot of moving pieces, a lot of things that are going on that are interesting. I'm really liking the way they're doing a lot of it, but I'm just worried for time. I'm worried for time's sake about how they're going to end this season in a satisfying way. Still not giving us any Abby. We don't have any more extra context with Abby or her group. We don't really know her relationship with Owen or Mel or anything like that. which we didn't in the game, but they gave a lot of extra time with Abby earlier on in this show to flesh her out a bit more. So the fact that we have not seen her again, and I presume we'll not see her again until right before the season closes out 2 weeks from now, is interesting. So yeah, this is, again, I think I might have said this before, this is one of those times where I think my knowledge of the video game is kind of working against me a little bit. And if I could just binge watch through all of it, I wouldn't have as much time to sit and stew and worry about certain things. But overall, I really liked the episode. I'm excited for next week where we're going to get a lot of flashbacks. I presume we're going to get, of course, the museum and the space shuttle. Of course, we're going to get that. I think we're going to get the scene where he teaches Ellie the Pearl Jam song, which we got a little segment of that in this episode. I think we're also, of course, going to get the Eugene reveal, whatever happened with him, and then the reveal of him telling Ellie what actually happened. And I think that the Eugene reveal plus that is going to be tied somehow. I don't know, like I speculated before that maybe Eugene, because he's a Firefly, maybe he has information about, the guy that murdered everybody at Salt Lake and the immune girl, and somehow he discovers that was Ellie, and then puts two and two together that Joel is the guy, and then Joel has to kill him, and then that ends up leading him to have to tell Ellie what the hell he's talking about. Like, I think those things are going to be tied together, but I think next week is going to be all that, all flashback, and then episode 7, the finale, is where we're going to catch back up with everybody in the modern day. So we'll see. Let me know your guys' thoughts, how you liking the show so far, if you're a video game fan, as well as if you're somebody who's never played the video game, your speculation, what you like, what you dislike. Let me know all that down below in the comments, and we'll see you next week. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for all of my 2025 new release reviews. I'm also going to put my playlist up here of all of my Last of Us coverage if you want to catch up on my thoughts on the season so far, as well as last season. Like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.